you want to?
Where will we find the recording at the after the session?
We'll tell you. It's on. It'll be put up on the
Our YouTube channel.
If you go to amherstneighbors.org and click on YouTube, you'll see a listing of all of our recorded programs.
Okay, thank you.
You're most welcome.
Well, let's start. Welcome to Amherst Neighbors' first Thursday series. I want to thank Christine Sanhalter and Dr. Sue Lowry for helping us plan today's program. And a special thanks to you too, Sue, for doing the tech work for us today. So, in June 2021, following months of grassroots activism in the wake of the George Floyd's murder, the town of Amherst became the second municipality in the nation to commit to reparations for its Black residents. Today, pardon me? I heard someone. No. Today, several members of Amherst African Heritage Reparations Assembly are here to tell us about their work, the history of reparations in the United States, and how you can get involved in this historical moment. We are going to explore what it is, what it isn't, and how the program might be implemented. Our guests will present on this topic and then field questions from the audience. Our presenters today are Michele Miller, co-founder of Reparations for Amherst, Kathleen Anderson, co-chair of the New England NCOBRA National Coalition of Blacks for Reparation, and Dr. Amilcar Shabazz, who is president of the National Council for Black Studies. And Dr. Shabazz has just received a prestigious award in Springfield just a couple of days ago. These people you're going to hear today are in the forefront of leading the fight for reparations for the descendants of enslaved African Americans living in Amherst, in Massachusetts, and in other slave-holding states in the United States of America. So I'm going to turn the program over to Michele Miller. Michele?
Yes, thank you. And thanks so much to Amherst Neighbors for giving us this opportunity. We really, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with our community. And so thank you all for being here. And I think we talked before the event today about breaking this up into some parts. So Dr. Shabazz is going to talk a little bit about the history of reparations, and Kathleen will talk about some state efforts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, some coalitions, and then I can speak a bit about our local work. And we really did want this to be a dialogue. So if we want to be able to answer questions and just be in community and in dialogue with everybody that's here. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Shabazz to give us some foundational knowledge here, and then we'll go from there.
Very good. Thank you so much. Happy to be with Amherst Neighbors again. The idea of reparations is as old as human conflict. When two individuals or two groups of people have a conflict and there is harm that is inflicted. It could be harm on both sides, but at some point when the conflict is ended, the oftentimes the winner will demand repair for the harms that they sustained in the course of the conflict, or at the root of the conflict. And on the other hand, in particular, as we consider this question of slavery, it's rather odd. The history of the demand for reparations really have their roots, a lot of their roots as far as the original 13 colonies here in Massachusetts. We have the very famous story of Belinda, who was enslaved by the royal family. And the royal family had property and investments in the Caribbean, and they enslaved people there. They brought the raw sugar up from the Caribbean to Massachusetts, right in Medford, and they would process it into rum. And they had enslaved workers from Africa at there in Medford that was part of producing this Medford rum. They would in turn then take that Medford rum and sell in England and sell and take parts of it to barter in Africa for more Africans. And this is what is known as the triangular trade, the triangular slave trade from the Americas to Europe to Africa. And Belinda came over in that triangular trade process. She ultimately came to work there in Medford. The house is there. You can go to Medford. It's still, the royal house is still there. There's a little mention about the enslaved who worked there. And but at any rate, as the War for Independence rose up, things for Royal got a little sticky, and he was, of course, loyal to the crown. And so he left. He left the United States. He left his property. He left his enslaved people, and he just went back to England. And after the War for Independence, after the U.S. is victorious, they will liquidate the estate of Royal, and part of that led to the enslaved people, such as Belinda, being freed. But she went on. By that time, she had worked for decades for the Royals. She went on to assert that, look, out of some of this other property you're liquidating, can you break off a little back pay for me, a little pension? And and we have the actual artifact of her statement that's preserved at Harvard University in the special collections unit of the library there. They've digitized it. It's online. You can see it for yourself. This woman, Belinda, was illiterate, could not write. And so you will see an X where she marks her mark, identifying that she agreed to this statement, attested that these are her words. So I often refer to her as Belinda X. And ultimately, there was a small payout to her. It wasn't all she needed or wanted or hoped for. She had a small daughter who was unable to work, who was disabled, and she's in her 70s at this point and is asserting, look, we're really on hard times here. I can't get out there and make a living anymore like that. And I have a child here that has special needs, and so she continued to assert. So that is part of a record of the fight for reparations in the United States. And of course, there are many others. There's Kwok and others who sue for their freedom, who petition for their freedom, and then also petition for some form of back pay, some form of compensation for them, for their years of labor, unwaged, forced labor. And so we have this as part of the background. But of course, slavery will persist as a national institution, as a national problem, straight down to the end of the Civil War. As in the course of the war, Abraham Lincoln is forced by military exigency, the boots on the ground, the reality of boots on the ground, to not only issue the Emancipation Proclamation that calls for freedom for enslaved persons in the slave states, not universally, but in the states that were in rebellion. And he will, and that takes effect, quote unquote, January 1, 1863, but actually had no effect in most of those rebel states because they were in rebellion and they were under the Confederate States of America, and it had no legal force. It had military force. And so as they liberated areas, those people were then considered free. And the problem of what to do with them as they followed the Union Army, so-called contraband, so-called camp followers, was ultimately to say, ultimately came about after a famous meeting of Frederick Douglass with Abraham Lincoln saying, look, we'll fight too. You know, you're having problems of white men, poor white men saying they don't want to be drafted, rich man's war, poor man's fight. You know, let us. We feel something at stake in this fight, and we will fight. And hence the 54th and the 55th and 5th Cavalry will begin to take in African Americans who volunteer. They're not drafted, they're volunteering from right here in Amherst. And of course, on the marble tablets that are presently in the poll room in the Banks Community Center, you can see a monument that these marble tablets that inscribe the names of the about 300 soldiers and sailors from this area that enlisted. And particularly about 30 of them were people of African descent that were in this area that signed up that and went to the 54th, the 55th, and the 5th Cavalry. So as the war goes in the North's favor after African Americans join the fight, we then have the treaty at Appomattox. We have the Juneteenth order is read out in Galveston, the last kind of area to be brought under the to bring the Civil War to the end, and so we have about 4 million formerly enslaved and about 400,000 who had already freed themselves, who had already become free. So 4.4 million people. What happens now? And at a famous gathering in Savannah, Georgia, commissioned where General who issues the General Field Order number 15, Sherman. Sherman is, and then Stanton, the secretary from Washington, is going to come down to attend the meeting. They assembled many Black representatives, Black leaders, a lot of them from church leaders. And they will say, what we want is, we want compensation, particularly we'd like land where we can go and be off to ourselves and take care of ourselves and provide for ourselves and have nothing to do with these people that enslaved us. So give us some land and we're good. And that became the basis of the Field Order number 15, calling for 40 acres to each formerly enslaved African American to receive that kind of parcel of land to farm and to own. And it happened for a few in that area, but they were late, and then the Sea Islands. But as things moved on, those land grants were rescinded, and many Africans people who had gotten some 40 acres ended up being taken back. So both and the major effort of the federal government to do something about this was the Freedmen's Bureau. If you ever want a good read about it, it's just one chapter in the book called The Souls of Black Folks by W.E.B. Du Bois. And there's a chapter on the Freedmen's Bureau that is very, very compelling. He tells you what Black people hoped it would do. He tells you what it actually accomplished, what it was up against, both in the South and in the Congress, and how it was ultimately vetoed. It wasn't extended. It had a brief life, and it wasn't extended because of the veto of Alexander Johnson, the president after Abraham Lincoln. And so from there, we see that the promise of reparations that should have occurred then this is part of the history of it. And then from there, Black people have in various forms and over the years have continued to raise this question, continued to fight for it. We are at a moment now. We're at a moment now where there's real possibility. And I'll just share with you the Senate Bill 40 has been introduced again in the United States Senate by Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. And it was introduced about a week ago on the January 24th. It was co-sponsored immediately by the people you can see here in the preamble section. And I want to note that both our senators from Massachusetts are a part of the original co-sponsors of the bill. That includes Senator Markey and Senator Warren. And it has gone on now to be introduced into the Senate Judiciary Committee. You will note in the previous Congress, the 117th, Sheila Jackson Lee, who introduced the related bill to this as H.R. 40, House Resolution 40. She actually got it last year in the House Judiciary Committee and approved. They had a hearing on it. Both sides, a Republican and Democrat, were able to have witnesses and talk about it, and they voted it, and it was approved. And that's the critical step toward then being able to bring something to a floor vote. So, but it was never brought to a floor vote. That was on Nancy Pelosi, but of course now the House has flipped, and the Republicans are in the majority, and we expect no appetite to move H.R. 40 over the next 2 years. But meanwhile, in the Senate, with it flipping Democratic, we have the opportunity now to get a hearing on this related bill in the Senate, which it did not do. It wasn't even introduced under Mitch McConnell in the 117th, but now it has been introduced. It has gone on to the Senate, been introduced to the Senate Judiciary Committee. It is to be calendared. And I point this out because in terms of talking about tangible things one can do as you learn about the struggle for Black reparations and want to support it, try to communicate with the members of the committee. The chair is Dick Durbin from Illinois. And you can see along the lines here, the others on both sides of the aisle that are on this committee, this particular committee. So we've got Feinstein, Leahy, Feinstein, Whitehouse, Klobuchar, Coons, Blumenthal, Hirono, big supporter out there from Hawaii. Cory Booker, of course, is introducing it. Alex Padilla, also California, and John Ossoff in Georgia. And then you see over there on the other side as well. But this is where it would go. This is where we needed to get a hearing. And even if it's a straight line party vote, let's get a vote and get it approved. It shows the support level in the Congress to do it. So that is the critical step. And I want you to see if you ever want to look this up for yourself, you can go through congress.gov, congress.gov, put in the legislation S40 in this case that you want to see. It'll give you a box like this. You can see the actual text of it. And I have to say this year it has been modified to reflect certain criticisms that were levied at the previous version of the bill. Some things have been modified. You can see here the action of it being read twice and referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. You can see now it's reached up to 22 co-sponsors. And again, both of our senators from Massachusetts are there. You know, a note to Warren, a note to Markey saying thank you and please try to, get this through the Judiciary Committee. We support it here. Your group, your organization, your church, you individually, this can help. This can help to push it through the Senate. And then finally, I just would say, there is a national call on Biden. This is the webpage of humanrightswatch.org, hrw.org/reparations now. All one word, reparations now. And you can see then they are supporting repair, that it can't wait, and that we need to create the Reparations Commission now. This is the body that would study and make the proposals, make recommendations. We would have to then go back to Congress to get any of those recommendations approved and funded. So right now, this is not, anything about big money to have this commission. And so some are saying it's time for the commission to be established by executive order, for Biden to go ahead, and simply because we know we aren't going to get any movement out of the Congress in toto. The House is not likely to, given the way they voted, the Judiciary Committee was party line against it. We don't expect that it's going to go change. The same people are there that were there in the minority, and maybe one or two different ones, but still the same basic position. So I just let you know that there is this petition. You can sign up to ask, Dear President Biden, I write to ask you to establish by executive order a federal commission that would study the legacy of enslavement and develop proposals for reparations. This would be the same commission provided for in the bill HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Proposals for African Americans Act, which has reached a record level of support of 215 members of Congress, committing to vote yes in the event of a full vote remains stalled in the chambers. Fortunately, the same commission can be set up by executive order, but this must happen now so that it can start working and issue recommendations before the next presidential elections. So this is the status of it. We're trying to get at least the commission up and going before the 2024 election, so that by that time, then we can be looking at making it a national issue for the actual support of some of the concrete proposals. The life of the commission, as provided by legislation, is 18 months. So if we can get Biden to do this in the next couple of months, then they could have the time to meet, to make recommendations, and let that then be part of the 2024 national election, some of those proposals. So that's my general overview of the national level, both historically and where we are right now. Thank you. I think I pass it on to Kathleen to update us on the state level.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining this session. It's important that this conversation take place around reparations, particularly I believe, particularly with people of European descent supporting this effort. I am a female co-chair of the New England chapter of NCOBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. And I am a member of a number of groups within the state of Massachusetts that are working towards reparations. They're both small groups, or all three are small groups. One is the Massachusetts for Reparations Group, which is contained and here in Western Mass. The other is a more statewide group that also includes members from the Western Mass area, along with a number of people who are in the eastern part of the state, primarily Boston. And so each of these groups have been meeting regularly to address the issue of reparations in the state of Massachusetts. We have had a couple of statewide conversations on reparations where a number of people from across the state have all been invited to participate in a conversation about reparations, how that should work, what we should do. And next session will be coming up before the summer. In the meantime, the group that is with the Boston area folks, we have met, well, actually both groups, the Western Mass group and the Boston area group people have met with various legislators over the past year in getting their support of reparations. And a recent meeting was this past week, where we met with either the senators or their staff members of Senator Lyda Edwards, Representative Andy Vargas, along with his staff person, Sasha Severino. We met with Rochelle Contario, who is a staff member for Senator Liz Miranda, and Devin Edwards, who is a staff member for Representative Holmes. And what we learned is that Senator Liz Miranda has put through a bill. It's SD 2393. And that is a bill to study and to establish a commission to study and develop reparations for African Americans in the state of Massachusetts. Let's see. So also there's an attempt to get our newly elected governor, Maura Healey, to, by executive order, create this commission to study and develop reparations for Black Americans. And so I think that's all I have to report about what's going on in Massachusetts.
So I can talk a little bit about what we're doing here locally in Amherst. I'm just wanting to check in. Carly, do you want to pause and take any questions, or should I continue on with some of the local work and then we'll pause for questions?
We'll pause after you speak.
Okay, and you might notice that the sun is coming in right behind me. I apologize. So yes, I am a member of the African Heritage Reparations Assembly along with Dr. Shabazz and 5 other members. I was looking in the audience. I think we're trying to make our way throughout the community and coming to different community events and organizations to talk about our work. So again, thank you for this opportunity. So right now where we are is in a consultative process with our community. We're in listening mode, essentially. So we hosted a listening session, I think it was 2 weeks ago now. We had a special guest, Congressman Jim McGovern, and we had over 100 people attend that session, which was really fantastic. Previous to that, we had an in-person listening session at the Hitchcock Center, and we also had a wonderful turnout there. So we're starting to hear from the community, particularly from the Black community. We're in the process of developing a survey with the Donahue Institute. And that's something I really want to just make everybody aware of, to keep your eye out for that. We're hoping to release that toward the end of maybe middle end of March, depending on, or excuse me, the end of February, beginning of March.
That's Michele Miller.
It sounds like maybe
She's the one who started this whole thing.
it sounds like maybe somebody is needs to mute. Not by hearing a voice. I'm not sure if others are hearing that. So this survey, we're hoping will be able to get out to as many folks as possible in the community, and we'll be asking questions about what folks know about reparations, how folks feel about reparations, how they would like to see the recommendations that we ultimately make to the town council, the form of reparations, eligibility. So all of these questions that I think maybe many of you are wondering about and are curious about, we as an assembly are working through a process now of trying to answer those questions. And so we did some of our foundational work in the beginning of our term together as an assembly. We did go to the town council, and we did receive a commitment for one stream of funding, and we will be pursuing other streams of funding as we continue with our work. So that there are multiple ways that we're trying to come at this for sure. And so that's basically over the next several months. We'll be hosting additional listening sessions. We'll have broad listening sessions, and then we'll have listening sessions with different community groups, organizations. And then, of course, getting the survey out there. Please, I wanted to just give you a quick tour of I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen here to give you a quick tour of our where you can find us. So this is the Engage Amherst page. Engage Amherst is a wonderful resource for the town if you haven't been there. And our URL is engageamherst.org/AHRA. Here you can find more information about our work. You can find our links to come to our meetings and join us. Generally, we're meeting on Monday afternoons. We're in the process of adding some additional meetings and potentially adding a retreat for assembly members to come soon. There's also here, I wanted to point to, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it says click here for the African Heritage Black Inclusion Portal. This is if you do identify as African Heritage and Black, and you would like to be kept abreast to our work, you can include yourself in this portal here, and we would really appreciate for folks here to let others know about this. And then you can also find some information like we have a resource page. This will take you to the town website. Here you can find some of our early reports that we put together, the partial historical timeline of slavery and structural racism in Amherst. And then we have a report here on anti-Black racism and Black-white disparities. I see some folks in the audience like Anita Sorrow, who was integral in this process early on. So just really want to share gratitude for that. We have the symposium that we did early on with Robin Rue Simmons, and some other things here, some articles and things you might be interested in. We are planning a screening. I'll stop my share here. We are planning a screening of a documentary called The Big Payback. You can watch it on PBS for free. It's streaming for free. And essentially, The Big Payback is a documentary following Evanston's work, and also provides other perspectives about reparations. So it's very interesting. It's about an hour and a half long, and we are partnering with some higher ed institutions and with other organizations in the community to host that screening in March. And Robin Rue Simmons, former Alderwoman Robin Rue Simmons in Evanston, will be joining us here. So keep your eye out for that. We hope you'll all be able to attend that. And let me see, Dr. Shabazz, what am I missing here about our local work?
No, I think you covered, and other things people can just well, we might mention that part of what's happened is other places are getting into the mix. Northampton now has a Northampton Reparations Committee that is, or I think just the other day or coming up, they are introducing a resolution before the city council there. They recently had a meeting that had over 300 people, a Zoom session like this with over 300 people. And you know what's cute is they keep mentioning how the Black population is smaller in Northampton than it is here in Amherst. So they really feel special that, you know, they're taking this up when the Black population there is even smaller than it is in Amherst.
In fact, they're tonight, the first reading of their resolution, which would put together a similar body as we have here in Amherst. They're having that reading tonight. So maybe just a moment for us to send them best wishes for tonight. It's a big, big historical moment for them, I think, to be introducing that. So and that's a good point, Dr. Shabazz, and also to what Kathleen's been talking about. This really is about linking arms and building coalitions, building community. This is everybody's work. It really truly is, and we're all in this, and we can all play a role. And it's hard work, and that's really, you know, one of the pieces of this that we don't really get to talk about a lot, but it's emotionally challenging work, and it's critical work. And so being able to be in community in this way and to support each other as we're doing whatever pieces of the work that we're doing is really valuable. So I would leave it at that for right now and just see if folks have questions, and we will field them the best that we can.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, in order to ask a question, I don't know if you've done this on Zoom before, but the easiest way for us to make sure we get to as many questions as possible is for you to go to the reactions icon. For most people, it'll be on the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, one of the options is to raise your hand. I just did that on mine, and you can see that my face now appears in the upper left corner. When we do that, you will appear in the order that you raise your hand. And that is more fair to everyone. So I see we've got some hands raised. I will also be scanning to see if there's anyone who's struggling with that part of the technology. And if your camera's on and you're waving your hand, I will make sure you have a chance to get your question asked as well. Thank you.
You want me to go?
Larry?
I would ask my question. I have a very brief question. I didn't get the name of the documentary, and also how new is it?
The documentary is called The Big Payback. It's streaming for free on PBS, and it was just released to the public. They did have some screenings maybe last month, but I think just this month it was released. So it's pretty new.
Great, thank you.
Ready?
Okay, let me unmute myself. I have a short question that's not simple. My question is, assuming this program of reparations goes forward successfully, how do you envision the impact on the African American community? Is it an economic impact? Is it the effect to be achieving economic parity in the community with the Americans of European descent? And at a time when all other programs that are aimed at achieving parity are being rescinded, affirmative action, all kinds of other things. The hope is that, so I'll stop there. So just envisioning what the results, what the impact of the program you expect it to be at the household level and at the community level for the African American population.
Could I give a little bit on that?
That is
Yeah.
all you and Kat. Yeah.
So well, first of all, it has to be looked at various levels. The national, the state impact, and the local impact. Nationally, one of the leading models that projects a certain kind of impact is one by an Amherst native, an Amherst local, went to high school here. His name is William Sandy Darity Jr. His father, who founded our School of Public Health, Bill Darity Sr., lived here from the 60s until he passed, and his remains are in Wildwood Cemetery. Well, his son, William Darity Jr., model is one that has gained a lot of notoriety. His book was best-selling. He and his wife co-authored their book, From Here to Equality. It's a profoundly significant model right now being talked about at the national level. What is argued in that model is that the most significant and the most important thing that can be done that could have meaningful impact on the 40-odd million, on the millions of African Americans, of which, by the way, upwards of 90% would be eligible in terms of having had an ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. Upwards of 90% would qualify. It is researchers have shown that the object of a national reparations program, Darity argues, should be to close the wealth gap. To close the wealth gap. That strides have been made since the 60s, particularly in terms of raising the median income level, the income level of African Americans. But income, as he points out, is different from wealth. And that wealth accumulation on the part of most African Americans is but a tiny fraction of the average of most white Americans. And so he argues for direct cash payments, not entirely now. He started to talk about some other kinds of benefits that could be a part of a national reparations program. But at the core of his recommendation is direct cash benefits over time, not necessarily a lump sum, but on the order of magnitude of trillions of dollars to compensate and to close this wealth gap. And so, so that's one area that is well studied, well researched, well documented in terms of the measurable effects that particular model or proposal of reparations could have at a national level on the millions of African Americans. There was a recent symposium at Harvard where there were papers presented about the health impacts that kind of closure of the wealth gap, that kind of that form of reparations could really have on the health of African Americans. And so it remains out there, not without its critics, but it remains out there as one really very important program at the federal level. Amherst or local level or states even could just really do not have the budgets to begin to do anything like what is proposed. And therefore, he really puts the focus of that proposal at the federal level. I'll stop there.
So I just want to say that the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations offers a number of injury areas that need to be repaired, areas that are the result of the enslavement of African people. And in addition to the wealth poverty gap is the idea of education. Now, there was an attempt in the 50s, 60s to do this separate but equal thing around education that hasn't really worked. But in addition to, and this is my thinking, and my thinking is resulting from Monday group I have with reading around by or about W.E.B. Du Bois. And the latest Ron DeSantis judgment around the removal of certain curriculum standards from Florida that have also been talked about in other areas around the country. But there needs to be truth about the actual history of the United States, and a truth that is unfortunately maybe not so pleasantly held up European Americans as the ideal. I mean, that has been the result of the emancipation and actually of the freeing. The enslavement of Black people was done with the idea that there is something inferior about this class of folks. So the education that needs to happen needs to be an accurate depiction of the United States and how we as citizens came to be where we are at this point in time. And then the health issue, Dr. Shabazz mentioned, but still, okay, we are in 2023. A statistic I read recently says that 62 or 63% of medical professionals still believe that Black people do not feel pain the way that European Americans do, that African Americans do not feel pain, and so that they're often mistreated in hospital settings that could lead to their death and often does. So that's another area that education needs to take place. Another issue is the criminal punishment. So as a result of the freeing of Black people in 1865, that led to the convict leasing issue. The 13th Amendment makes it legal to re-enslave African Americans. And that legality takes place through the criminal injustice system. That needs to be repaired. An interesting example is that through the 60s, 70s, and into the present, African Americans are held to a higher standard around drugs, particularly marijuana. But look what is legal right now. So much so that there are big, huge billboards in public places and signs on roads that advertise the sale of cannabis. So now white people, European Americans, are making money selling marijuana when a huge number of African Americans are still in prison for selling marijuana. And that needs to be repaired. So not only do these areas need repairing, but there needs to be a system put in place so that this never happens again. Some people have talked about how long should reparations take effect. Or they want to think of it as a one and done payout. But here in the United States, we have been dealing with the effects of the enslavement and the discrimination and of African Americans for 400 years. And so I say that reparations, a reparations bill, a reparations plan needs to be in place for the next 400 years.
So, Kathleen,
Yes.
You're muted. Kathleen isn't muted. Sue is muted.
I think the person was just rooting on Kathleen. I think we can go to the next question, Gary.
Gary, please go ahead.
Sure. This comes right out of what Shabazz and Kathleen were saying. There does seem to be a different set of possibilities on a national level than on a state level than on a municipal level. And it would really be helpful to think about, and I'm sure some of our speakers have, about what kind of things might be particularly appropriate on a municipal level, or either state or municipal. Because we really do have to, it's not just one thing that can happen. There are all kinds of things like supporting education, for instance, making access to healthcare. But particularly here in Amherst, what can we be thinking about? Any set of ideas would be useful to me. Like, for instance, guaranteeing scholarships for students going on to college, our Black students specifically.
Gary, I think we'd like to continue to hear more of that from you all. That's our role, and that's an excellent one. What you're raising, one of the findings in that were turned over to the town very early on by Reparations for Amherst identified real gaps in the college going rates of our Amherst high school graduates, in terms of African Americans vis-a-vis the other groups of graduates at the high school. Maybe scholarships could make a difference. Maybe some specialized advising and counseling and college preparatory application supports could make a difference. So these are the kinds of things we want to hear about. Chad, to your comment in the chat, yes, under crime and punishment, the criminal crime and punishment gap, harm, injury area, we are definitely in support of police reform, the efforts that are going on already. And so part of where our report may simply be to, call for support for the kinds of efforts that are underway through the Community Safety and Social Justice Committee that is a body appointed by the town to carry on and to implement the recommendations that were made by the Community Safety Working Group. to continue to push for those and to recommend those and make way for those through our town council and town manager. So we definitely see things in that area that could be done. So we're all ears to hear more from you. We have a former principal of our schools on the line. Very proud to honored to have him here with us. What are the kinds of things at that early childhood level? I don't, I can't say that I'm really tracking how we're doing on pre-K, universal pre-K in Amherst. When I was on school committee, I was involved in the issue and have tried to track it for a while. But particularly, we know the research, the evidence is there that if educational opportunities are extended, whether half a day, full day, are extended to children just about as soon as they're potty trained, if the more they have access to books, to the kinds of enrichment, the more they can be on track with their peers through elementary schools. But otherwise, where there isn't that kind of access, we find that the gap, the educational, the academic achievement gap, begins to manifest as early as the second and third grade of our Black students versus relative to their peers. So we've got a lot of work, got some proven things that we could certainly be about recommending and implementing here locally. But with a group like you all and all the experience levels you have, we're all ears to hear more along the lines of what Gary Tartikoff was just calling for. Thank you.
Another question?
Anita Sarrow, would you like to please speak?
Sure. Thank you to all of the speakers for walking us through this and for everyone to have an interest in this topic. I think for pretty much most, if not all of us European Americans, that unfortunately, this is all new information to us, and the history that underlies this is all new information to us. So I think one of our challenges, while we're supporting efforts for reparations and true equality, is to really educate ourselves. And I want to give a shout out to JCA for developing the Stolen Beam curriculum, which is a real eye-opener, and I would encourage everyone to take that course. The readings are profound, troubling, and as Michele said, emotional. It's an emotional call to support this effort, and we need to do that from a framework of true knowledge. So I would just encourage everyone to take advantage of every opportunity we have to build our knowledge base.
I would echo that as well. As Anita Sarrow has just pointed out, I was a participant in one of the series myself, and it's not only readings, but videos as well. I mean, a lot of just really good, very accessible material. You don't need a PhD, you don't need a whole lot of background. It takes you where you are and elevates your knowledge. So yeah, I would add support. I want to pick up on something Anika Henderson put in the chat, and really to say I was struck by recently reading a news article, New York Times or something, and it gave the citation, and I did glance at the citation, but researchers had found that if you really wanted to bring about a real reduction in, for example, African Americans being shot by the police and problems like that, that investing in organizing 10 community-based organizations in the Black community, among Black people, would have more lasting effects, enduring effects on reducing crime and reducing African Americans, harmful effects like going to jail or being killed, than more police, than increasing the police department's budget. So it's something to really think about. And so in relation to Anika's point, the investment in a well-organized club, something in the schools that would appeal to the African-American students in the school could go a long way toward addressing disparities, addressing things like the college-going rate, addressing things like the dropout rates, the achievement, in the curriculum, who's taking more advanced placement courses, just organizing. And let me say, if the administration is saying no at this point, let's not take no for an answer. Think about athletics, okay? Athletics, they get huge booster clubs, they raise money from the outside, and they get these sports, right? So why can't we think in terms of booster clubs, in terms of reparatory justice clubs that could, come together and support and something that would organize amongst the Black students in the school and help them achieve something they want to achieve. I don't know what it would be. I think we'd have to go to the young people themselves, go to those students and ask them what kind of thing that may not be covered right now by People of Color United, POCU, or by MSAN, the Minority Student Achievement Network, which, by the way, both of those are not racially exclusive in any way. Anybody can join either of those groups in the school, MSAN, MSAN, or POCU. So, there might be a kind of a push or a preference for it to be more affinity-based ethnically or what have you. But even there, POCU is not exclusively African-American people or African heritage people. So, a kind of group that could organize around maybe even an African-American reparations club, where the young people could be organized to learn this history about themselves, about their own people, about their own genealogy, about the struggle for freedom and resistance. Forming an African-American reparations club or African-American studies club in the school. And if we got to support it from the outside, to raise a stipend, to incentivize a faculty or a staff person to help, to help put an hour a week or a couple of hours a week into the program, then let's work from the outside. Or perhaps that's something the funds from AHRA could even go toward underwriting or supporting to have this kind of organizing in the school. So I think, yes, Anika, that's a brilliant idea. I hope we can save this chat as well. And just one other piece in returns of a comment by Chad. Black entrepreneurial development, forming of Black businesses, Black people, becoming part of this free enterprise system that is so vaunted and regaled all over the world. The actual fact of the matter is there's again a Black business development gap. Black business, there is an entrepreneurial gap here in Amherst. The barriers to folks forming businesses, especially brick and mortar businesses. I've begun to meet Black people who have e-commerce businesses, but they're located in Amherst, but they have e-commerce businesses. It's not brick and mortar. There's no shop. There's no place to go to, but that's their livelihood. They're working through e-commerce. We have a number of people Black folks who have consulting businesses. And we do have a few that are in buildings, mostly as renters, such as Global Cuts, such as the salon right next to it, owned by a Black woman. There are a few businesses like that. And of course, the restaurant in downtown Amherst, Hazel's, which got no support from ARPA, no ARPA funding, nothing from the bid that was put in charge, given all this money to dole out, Business Improvement District people.
Would you tell us what ARPA means? Tell us what ARPA means.
So this is the American Rescue and Recovery Act that was doled out in the trillions by the federal government. A lot of it went to state governments, which then doled them out to municipalities, and then municipalities doled them out in different ways. Some covering internal operations of the government, but then local government, but then some going out to support businesses, in which, in this case, the bid was selected to dole that out. And again, some African Americans did apply, African American businesses did apply, but were turned down. And one of the specious arguments I heard for why it's turned down is that they were behind in their rent, or they weren't as well organized as we thought they should be. Well, damn it, that's what the money would go to help them to do, to pay their rent, to get stabilized, to be able to, and whatever else they may be lacking, let's figure out how to bring those supports, the technical expertise or whatever, to help them. So I think that, we're finding, yes, Chad, there's a lot in relation to reparations and closing the wealth gap that we can do locally by stimulating Black and supporting Black business development and growth.
You're muted, Sue.
The dog was barking. I muted myself. Gary, would you like to ask a question, please?
Actually, partly a question and partly an answer to my own question from earlier. I don't know the correct term, and somebody will come up with it pretty quickly, but we've had for the last 25 or so years, maybe longer, set-asides for public governments when they're who they patronize, number of union people who have to be in a contract for the federal government to take on the people. We've had things that helped women, specifically women-owned businesses, for instance, and certainly Black-owned businesses could get a certain percentage of city business. I mean, that's one thing actually Amherst can do that's real. It goes back to that ARPA kind of thing, but this is there all the time. The city is constantly buying different kind of supplies, and if it could lean towards minority-owned companies, like it can toward women-owned companies, that is a way, again, reparations can be done on a local level that fits where we are.
There's another question in the chat from Ash Hartwell. I'm going to just read it. Have there been proposals thinking about having the 3 Amherst universities use their resources to play a significant role in working with the Black youth in schools and clubs for arts, music, sports, performance, and also linked to further education, scholarships, and opportunity, connecting to students' own studies? Who wants to take that on?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been a strong effort to approach Hampshire, Amherst College, or UMass around that issue. If I'm in error, let me know, but I think there hasn't been a strong approach to either of the institutions.
I can just jump in and say that tangentially, we're beginning to work to build our relationships with the 3 higher ed institutions in Amherst. So some conversations have begun with different folks at different levels. Some folks in the on the professorship side, some on the administrative side, and we will continue to build those supports in the community. And I think, you know, Ash is really raising an excellent point. There's so much power, so much empowerment possible for our community when we consider that we have these higher ed institutions and some other organizations in our community. And so it's really a matter of trying to get out of our individual silos and try to really work together to see, because what's possible is much greater than what we can even imagine, I think, if we really, really begin to make those connections and build those relationships.
I'll say a little bit, and if I get fired, then I'm going to come to Amherst Neighbors for help.
Okay.
No, UMass is, I think, not necessarily calling it reparations or reparatory justice, has made some moves since the murder of George Floyd, you know, over the last couple of years. And one of them is the Black Presence Project at UMass. This was conceived and a lot of it, the early on, executed by our beloved Professor John Henry Bracey Jr. Professor Bracey has been in a process over the last years to donate his own archives, his own papers to the UMass Library. And let me tell you that those papers are immense and immensely important. And he's been giving those archives. Remember, this is a scholar, a brilliant scholar that has been here since 1972. I often tell myself the civil rights movement and Black Power era that he was so much a part of, you know, the balance of his life really has been as an Amherst citizen, as a citizen of this town. He's been here since 72. It was, you know, his young days were there out there in Chicago and Washington, D.C., raising hell in the civil rights movement and going down to Mississippi as he did. But the vast majority of his life as a scholar, as an activist, was waged right here from Amherst, Massachusetts. We should never forget that. So he conceived of this Black UMass project. It did get funding from the Chancellor's office, and has begun to put online on the web a number of very important kind of digital archive about the Black presence at UMass, which goes back largely to a man who came here from Alabama in the late 1800s, around late 1898 or so, named George Bridgeforth, but has since that time, you know, had a number of people that have come through here, and that presence is really being documented in this Black UMass Presence Project. Other little things, you know, been going on. We renamed our Fine Arts Center, one of our largest and most significant buildings on our campus, for Randolph Brommery, who was the first chancellor of African American descent, to not only at the University of Massachusetts, but in the nation. There was maybe one other woman about the same time in Michigan or somewhere that came to be the CEO of an institution of a predominantly white institution of higher ed. We've had Blacks over historically Black colleges, you know, far longer. But in terms of predominantly white institutions, Randolph Brommery was the first person of African descent to head up such a predominantly white institution. And we've named a significant building for him. Part of that building, we've renamed a significant space in that building for Fred Tillis, the wonderful scholar of music and musician that was so instrumental in developing jazz studies. Again, not just at UMass, but within higher education. It's one of our first oldest and strongest programs studying the musical genre of jazz, or what some call African American classical music. That's Frederick Tillis. So we've begun some things at UMass. Is it enough? No, it's just the beginning. And it's not, as Kathleen said earlier, any of this ought to be thought of as one and done. So we look to a new chancellor. I see the two finalists both have connections to Texas, and as you all know, I'm an old Black Texan. That's where I have my roots. One of them, we share the same alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. The other one got his PhD, I think, in economics at Texas A&M. And given that I'm a Longhorn, we'll have to forgive him for being an Aggie, if that's who we get. But I look to be knocking on the doors of whichever of those gentlemen become our chancellor, our next chancellor, and hope to see where they will want to kind of lead and support this campus, because we've got people doing things all over. In our political science department, Kesha Inteta has been doing and analyzing public opinion surveys on reparations, especially how white folks, the public opinions of white folks on reparations. Mostly it's been at a national level and a database that they have been collecting, but he's doing things trying to analyze what's going on in terms of public opinion formation in America, and especially amongst white folks, for this question of Black reparations. Things in my own department, W.B. Du Bois Afro-American Studies, things going on in the College of Ed related to reparatory justice. So we've got, and of course amongst our students. So we've got things that is appearing. And I can't speak for Amherst College, but I do know a little bit of some things going on out there, looking at the relationship of the college's early years, its financing, and the endowments funds that came to support Amherst College, how they were linked to slavery, the slave trade, to plantations in Mississippi, and the inhuman treatment of Black people, to help build the fortunes of some of the early trustees and donors to Amherst College. So, that's one thing I know that they're looking at over there. Michele and I have met with students, and they've been contributing. She can speak more to that, but our higher ed institutions, it's not a zero. It's not a zero by any stretch, but there is still more work to do and a ways to go.
Thank you. What other questions do we have? Don't be shy. This is your chance. You don't get this much expertise in one room very often. Michael?
Yes, hi. Greetings from Pelham. I had a question for any of the speakers, and thank you very much, Kathleen and Dr. Shabazz and Michele. I've attended some of the presentations that the representative from Evanston held when she was here. I'm wondering if the model of how they're doing reparations in their city, and if you can speak to the model that they've come up with whatever funds they've acquired, what they're doing and how they're using that, making those decisions about funds or going forward, and is there anything there for Amherst to be looking at that would be appropriate?
The big payback that was just mentioned is a study. It talks about the history of the reparations in Evanston. It interviews people who are directly related to the reparations effort. So that's a good place to get the answers to your questions. Primarily, the Evanston reparations is around housing. And so I'm not exactly sure how people are identified to receive funds for the housing, but reparations amount or some that is around the housing issue in Evanston.
Mhm.
But like I said, the big payback is good. It talks about reparations in Evanston.
And Kathleen, is that something that's been looked at in Amherst as a potential model, or are we not at that stage? You're not at that stage of discussion?
We haven't yet discussed that. I have attempted to, there have been a couple of several sessions to have conversations about how the Amherst funds would be used. I unfortunately, because of health issues, have missed a couple of those. So either Michele or Dr. Shabazz could more directly answer your question around the talkbacks, the listening sessions around reparations for Black Americans in Amherst.
Thank you.
Shabazz, I know Michele had to step away. Do you have?
Yeah,
do you
because she knows a
further
lot.
thoughts?
She knows a lot on the Evanston issue, and so I was pausing for her. I was showing on the screen a little bit of the Evanston webpage, City of Evanston webpage, and as Kathleen notes, and as you can see yourself, that the restorative housing policy program is a big part of it. They particularly have a FAQ section that frequently asked questions that you can also read, that explains why they don't give cash payments for reparations, why how much money was actually devoted. It has been a model to us in some respects. You know, when we first were organized, the committee first began meeting, we were following the emphasis of Evanston in terms of trying to identify funding streams. And because I had heard at a meeting where Alyssa Brewer had pointed out that no town discussion, not in town meeting, not on the select board, and then even on this newly emerged town council when it had started, there had been no discussion of what to do with the revenues from cannabis. It's a new funding source. And so we decided in our AHRA, let's talk about the funding of the cannabis funding. And we made recommendations in the next month. We began sitting in September, and in October, we gave an initial report because we wanted it to be able to to help influence the budget cycle discussions. And it did. And so what became of that is, you know, the council heard our arguments. We attended a meeting of their body to discuss our recommendations. And, you know, it was, there was pushback. Lynn Greismer in particular did not like the idea of earmarking the cannabis tax revenues to the reparations fund. Others spoke negatively, and they had good I heard some of their reasons. It wasn't that they were you know, just non-supportive. They had good reasons. They didn't like the idea of tying up funds that when you might want to have a little more discretion if things went really sour for Amherst, that if you had all these funds, different funds indexed or earmarked certain ways, you couldn't be able to respond as rapidly. And they had other reasons that they didn't think that that was a good way to go. But what they ended up doing is modeling the annual contributions to the reparations fund, which we have a fund now. You should know it's over. I think it's close to 400,000. Over 300,000 is in an account that has come from two disbursements of monies from what is called certified free cash. At the end of every fiscal year, it is often the case that the town of Amherst did not spend all of the money budgeted to it. And so once it goes through a process of clearing all the things the accountant has to clear and everything else, what's left is then certified as free cash, which they can do with whatever they want to do. Some of it can be put toward future spending and capital projects. Some could be put in other different things. they decided to take an equivalent amount to what was collected in cannabis tax revenue to go ahead and to deposit to the African Heritage Reparations Fund. Okay, so, and it's been done, it was done this just last year, 2022, and it was done from certified free cash in 2021. So we've done it 2 times now, and there is a track record and a protocol that's been established for them to do it again in the fall of 2023. Knock on wood, we don't go down the toilet fiscally or anything, and there is some unspent balances from the current year's budget. So that is modeled in many ways on the was stimulated by the example of Evanston, which is working from the cannabis tax revenue for what is funding their commitment of $10 million. So yes, it's been an influence, but again, our final report, we will not be recommending one thing the way Robin Ruth Simmons and the City Council of Evanston ultimately came out with one thing, which was this restorative housing policy program. Okay, and it's not one and done. There's efforts underway now to do other things in other areas besides housing. They are looking at economic development, reparatory justice projects. They are looking at reparatory justice projects in education. One of the things when Kathleen and I and Michele were there, they brought us to the one they told us about in this Black area. And mind you, Evanston's a small suburb of Chicago. It's a city. It has a significant Black population. And due to the segregated housing policies, they're mostly in this one ward or one area of Evanston. And yet, over time, where they did have schools in that area, in that neighborhood, all the schools had been closed going into the 80s or whatnot. And so one of the demands of the community was, let's reopen a neighborhood-based, a school in our neighborhood, because otherwise their children have to get up the Black children of that neighborhood have to get up very early in the morning to catch buses to schools here and there and all over Evanston. There's no elementary school in their neighborhood. So that has come up as a kind of not directly reparations idea, but it's come up in the course of this struggle for reparatory justice, and also history culture. They have a Black culture research center, Black History Research Center there. It's called, what is it, Kathleen? The North Shore Library Research Center. We have nothing like that here in Amherst. Yeah, we got 3 colleges. Yeah, we got our Afro-American Studies department at Afro-American Studies at UMass, and we've got Black Africana Studies at Amherst College. But let me tell you, in terms of a locally supported investment into some form of museum, research center, cultural center, we have nothing. We have nothing in Amherst. And yet in Evanston, they have developed this facility. We were taken on a bus there. We toured it. We met Brother Dino, who is one of the
director.
He's the director of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the big payback. You'll see it. And it's doing wonderful work, like Ancestral Bridges is doing here. We have great work going on, but we've got no physical locus for it. We've got no physical space dedicated to it. Okay. And I know in the Jones Library, if ever and whenever that expansion happens, there will be, I know there's plans to make space for the tablets and to take them out of the poll room in the bangs. But what else? What else is possible? And if not there in the expanded Jones, let's think about someplace else, something like they're doing in Evanston for a Black culture center, research and museum type center. We need that. We need that.
Thank you.
Charlie, do we have time for one more question Freddie's had her hand up for a while.
We might have time for one more question. Yes.
Thank you so very much. First of all, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to hear what's happening. It's really exciting, all of the movement that's gone into this, all of the energy and how it's building momentum. And I just want to say it's been about 60 years since freedom riders and the voter registration was happening in the southern and northern parts of the United States. And you can see the impact in terms of representation. It's visible. I just wondered if you had a sense of the timeline on this sort of using reparations to achieve equitable wealth between populations, maybe as indicated by home ownership, which is a good indicator of intergenerational wealth. What do you imagine is the timeline that would have the level of home ownership among Americans of African descent and the Americans of European or the Americans of mixed descent become a little bit more equitable?
I mentioned that earlier. I said the timeline should be the next 400 years.
400 years.
Yes.
I don't think I can wait
Yes.
that long.
I'm not joking. I'm not
Can I have a
joking.
bathroom break? No, I know you're not. And
Some things sooner, but definitely yes.
I don't mean that it should take 400 years. What I mean is it should start now and last for the next 400 years.
I think that's the program, Kathleen. I think what the question being posed is how long, depending on the types of things that are done, could it take or would it take? And I will say—
Could it take before what?
Before you could begin to see specific in terms of something like the closing of the wealth gap or in terms of home ownership. And I will say, there has been some gaming out of this. The person that inspired William Darity to begin to look at the question of Black reparations was an economist named Richard America. Richard America. And it was his book that he assembled different economists to look at aspects of the economics of Black reparations and in different questions. And indeed, particularly in terms of the question you're raising. And so there have been some gaming out of if you did this type of reparations at a federal level, at a national level, in terms of direct cash benefits, what it could lead to. But yeah, it's so I would refer you to the Richard America for some gaming out of that question.
Thank you.
And there was one question about how the reparation, I believe it was addressing the reparations municipal funds here in Amherst and how that would be used. And if that's the question, the answer is we have been having a gathering of the Black Americans of Amherst to have a discussion about how those funds can be used. And so I have a list of over 100 people, almost 150 people. The person asking the question is on that list, and I've been sending out the dates to the listening sessions, the discussion sessions. So I know that Dr. Shabazz and Michele, well, yes, and the people on the Amherst Reparations, whatever, the ARHS, AHRA, have hopefully have decided on a next date to have the conversation. So if people will wait just a little bit for the next session to be scheduled, then we'll be sending out the announcement for that. And hopefully more and more Black Americans of Amherst will participate so that we can have a real good discussion about how the funds should be used.
Is Michele still here?
No, she's gone.
Okay.
Had to go.
I'd hope to be able to we've got to end this program. It's beginning of a conversation with Amherst Neighbors. I'm hoping we can get you back again. I want to thank you for participating in this program and helping us better understand the significance and the importance of this, of a reparative process. I'm proud of the steps. I'm so proud of the steps that have been taken so far, and I look forward to seeing where the next steps will take us. Thank you all for what you do to heal, to mend, and repair this still broken world. I hope that you have enjoyed this program. I think it's been rich, and I think that we'll have to have you back so you can keep us updated. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Amherst Neighbors.
And thank you all for coming. Oh, I have to remind you, although we are Amherst Neighbors, continues to be a no-fee organization, there are still costs to providing the services and the programs that we have. If you are able, please take a look at what we have to offer and then donate. Thank you very much.
And remind us again where we will find the recording of this session.
It will be on our webpage.
AmherstNeighbors.org.
.org.
On that page, you'll see a YouTube icon, and you'll be able to click on that and see this program as well as others that have been presented and recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking that question again.
Yes.
Well
And
done, guys. That was great. Thank you so much.
really great. And thank you, Amilcar, you were our first guest for our first Thursday series. And thank you for coming back again.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Appreciated.